Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here tonight for our first in-store event of the year. We're here to celebrate Josh Riedel and his debut novel. Please report your bug here. Yes, make some noise for Josh. We're in for a lovely evening as we have Yohanca Delgado here in conversation. Thank you for being here, Yohanca. Let's make some noise for her. My name is Evan Karp. I'm the events manager for Booksmith here. We are an independent bookstore and mainstay of the Haight-Ashbury district here for the last 47 years, incredibly. The book has been getting a lot of love, and I'm really excited and proud that we get to celebrate this launch with you all tonight. Our stars, Yohanca Delgado is a 2021-2023 Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford University and a 2022 National Endowment for the Arts recipient. Her recent fiction appears in the Best American Short Stories 2022, the O. Henry Prize Stories, the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, the Paris Review, One Story, A Public Space, Story, and Elsewhere, pretty much all the things that you read. Her recent essays appear in Time, The Believer, and New York Times Magazine. She holds an MFA in creative writing from American University and is a graduate of the 2019 Clarion Workshop. And Josh Riedel was the first employee at Instagram, where he worked for several years before earning his MFA from the University of Arizona. His short stories have appeared in One Story, Passages North, and Sycamore Review. Please report your bug here is his first novel. He lives here in San Francisco. Without further ado, guys, very excited to welcome Please Report Your Bug here into the world today. Please help me warmly welcome Josh Riedel and Yohanca Delgado.
Thank you. Thanks. That was a nice introduction, and thanks to Booksmith for having us here and everyone for coming. It's kind of surreal to look out onto the audience and see like all these people from the last 15 years of my life. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to read from the beginning of the book. This is like a 10 or 15 minute excerpt, and then Yohanca and I are going to chat for a little bit, and you all can ask us questions. This beginning of the book, all you really need to know is that the narrator of this book, Ethan, works at a dating app called Date, and for some reason, the founder of this app has asked him to write a mission statement for the app that already exists. Here we go. I closed the content review queue and sent off a few emails turning down press interviews from lower tier publications. Then I put my computer to sleep and opened Date on my phone, hoping that focused engagement with the app would inspire a mission statement. I was a prolific Date user, though only for testing purposes. I wasn't looking for a partner so soon after my breakup with Isabel. Work kept me way too busy. Still, I needed to find out, for the sake of this mission statement, what it was like to finally see my top match. And to do that, I had to answer more of the app's questions. The Tell Us About Yourself questions were written by some New Age psychologist in West Marin, a friend of a friend, the founder said, and seemed so innocent and lightweight that the typical user answered approximately 600 in their first week. This was part of the secret to our success, the ability to induce a flow state in the user on sign-up. The algorithm started off with easy questions, your favorite foods, hobbies, animals, and gradually began to pepper in questions on more sensitive topics, your fears, fantasies, medical history. The user, not wanting to break momentum, would answer those questions without thinking. Only after you completed 1,000 questions would we show you a set of matches. We needed to keep our churn rate low, so match results were throttled. Instead of showing your top match right away, we'd show you profiles with an 80% compatibility rate. Only after you dated all matches in that bracket would we show you the next percentile up. At that point, we also granted you the ability to share one new photo to your profile daily, so long as you continued to answer the Tell Us About Yourself questions. Users were as obsessive about curating photos as they were about answering questions. The photos allowed them to express themselves in ways words couldn't. Users paired with their 90th percentile matches were a minority in the first couple months of the app's existence. Considered our power users, they answered on average over 4,000 questions and dated between 13 and 15 lower percentile matches, before finding true love in the 91 to 93% range. In other words, they never met their top match, though of course they never knew that. We did not display compatibility rates publicly. Thanks to my admin privileges, I didn't have to date my lower percentile matches before viewing my top match. But I couldn't skip the questions. I'd answered 9,873, and I only needed to answer 127 more before I could see my top match. I set to work. I always used the app at home on my own time and my own space, but I needed to complete this task now. Even if the content review queue became impossibly backed up, even if emails went unanswered, I put on my headphones and blocked everything else out. Hours passed, and I entered into a trance state, small hits of serotonin keeping me alert as I tackled the questions. It was slightly addictive to reveal to the app and to myself what it was that made me, me. Especially this far in the process, when the basic questions were dropped for more open-ended questions like, if you could be invisible or have the power of flight, which would you choose? I would fly, because even if someone spotted me in hiding, I could fly away. Also, as a kid, my dad always asked me if I'd ever have a flying dream, and I never did, still never have, and how great would it be if I could tell him that even though I'd never had a flying dream, I could fly in real life. Then again, character limit exceeded. Next question. If your soul, or essence, is a basketball, what color is the ball? Orange? I don't get the question. What if I don't believe in any kind of soul or essence? What if I believe what science says, that what we are and what we see are character limit exceeded? What is the last living organism you saw? The engineer who just walked past me to use the bathroom again. Wait, no, the plant in the corner of the office, which, now that I think about it, I'm not even sure is real. Who waters it? No sunlight comes in. I have to check. Okay, confirmed it is real. How could that be? So I guess that's the last living organism character limit exceeded. We knew answering yes or no questions in a single tap was more efficient than these free-form responses, but it was about quality, not speed. The investors who worried about user retention were the only reason we imposed character limits in the response field. That was the founders' compromise for not implementing a slew of other suggestions the investors pushed, such as swiping left or right on profile photos to indicate whether you find another user attractive. That's not to say we didn't let you browse photos, it's just that we made you earn your time. After a few minutes of browsing, the tell us about yourself questions took over the screen. Answering a certain number allowed you to browse again. DateDate defied all rules about how to make an engaging app. So much friction, one early reviewer in TechCrunch stated. And yet our user base continued to grow, and hardly anyone left. The founder compared this friction to opening a good bottle of whiskey. The slow process of removing the wax seal made you more desirous of what was inside. No need to rush. We were crafting the perfect experience of love. I consider the tell us about yourself questions the heart of the app. The questions weren't intended to tell potential partners about you. They were geared towards self-discovery. I'm a mystery to myself, the founder said, in his pitch before I left my previous job to work on DateDate full-time. How could I possibly know what or whom I want? But that was only part of the story. DateDate's real secret sauce was our mood sensing tech. We used the phone's camera, microphone, and accelerometer to understand your current mood. This determined the quantity and intensity of questions presented in your session. The camera captured facial expressions, smiles, frowns, squints. The microphone captured critical vocalizations such as yawns, grunts, and highly mood-indicative words such as lucky or bummed or sexy. And the accelerometer tracked your movements and the movements of your phone, from where you use the app, in a cafe, in the car, in bed, to whether your phone was facing up or down. Facing down meant you might be feeling shy or introverted, so fewer questions. Nobody raised issues about this tech because nobody was aware we employed it. We buried our disclosure deep in our terms of use. Besides, it wasn't that invasive. Other startups were worse. At least we weren't selling your genetic data. Anticipating my top match, I hoped to feel an instant connection. With Isabel, our love was gradual, not instant, which was fine and maybe more realistic. but I couldn't help craving that more elusive movie love. Love like whatever swam laps inside me the first time I watched Emily Hubley's animation in Hedwig and the Angry Inch my freshman year of college. Love is a quest for a long-lost partner. Love is fated, love is earned. A love at the end of 10,000 questions. Top match available, a pop-up read. View now? Yes, no. I tapped yes. Riley S.'s short bio read, Cornell alum in Hartford, explorer at heart, in search of meaningful connection, not hookups. I scanned her photos. A fountain near buildings in what I assumed was downtown Hartford, a steaming cup of green tea on a small plate made of green-tinted glass, her muddy hiking boots. I scrolled down to her answers, where one was displayed randomly by our algorithm. What would you do with $1 billion? Her answer, give it away. I was starting to like her. Finally, I reached her profile photo, blurred. We intentionally blurred profile photos and positioned them at the bottom of the screen to encourage users to connect with their matches on a more intimate level before judging their physical qualities. Tapping into the photo triggered a pop-up. By viewing this photo, you agree to send a photo of yourself to this user. I tapped on Riley S.'s photo. The pop-up appeared. I swept my hair out of my face. Accept. The app took my photo and showed me Riley S. She was posed in a vineyard, a glass of wine in hand. I didn't recognize her or the vineyard, and I didn't feel any of the emotions I expected. I didn't feel attracted or aroused or curious or in love. No, I didn't feel any of that. Instead, I felt like I was falling. I clutched the arm of my chair and held on tight. I was in the office, and I was not. And then there I was, not at my desk or in the vineyard with my top match, but in an undefined space, a vast empty space. Well, not entirely empty. I was in a field with tall, wet grass, and above me the sky was wide and filled with birds, and in the distance, though I couldn't see it over the grassy knoll, I heard the ocean, the churn of waves. Gravity worked, but it wasn't pulling me down the same way it usually did, because I felt light, like I could fly. Although when I tried, I only floated in place for a second before tumbling to the ground. Hello? I cried. Nobody answered. I tried to take deep breaths, to calm myself and assess my situation. But I felt so untethered from myself that I panicked. I needed someone to touch or talk to, someone to assure me I still existed. I rubbed my hands together and searched for the small scar on my wrist, where as a kid I let the scissors slip. It was there, the faint mark that told me these hands were mine. This was me. I placed my palm over my chest. My heart was pounding. I stood and tilted my head back. Birds flew across the cloudless sky. As they disappeared into the horizon, another flock emerged behind me and followed the same path. Watching the birds steadied my breath. I could hear not only the churn of distant waves, but also the birds squawking overhead and the whistle of the wind through the tall grass. A human noise, too, possibly laughter or crying. A bird dropped from the sky, dead, and landed at my feet. Then another and another. Panicked, I ran fast through the field toward the sounds of the ocean until I was back in the office. You okay? The founder asked. I can hear you breathing. I wiggled my toes in my shoes, which I expected to be soaked from running through the grass, but they were dry. I'm fine. I glanced at my phone, at date. Riley S.'s photo was nothing more than a black rectangle. I'd just seen her photo. What happened to it? Do you see this? I asked the founder, holding up my phone, my hand shaking. He glanced over at me. Add it to the bug report, he said. We should have a fix out soon. This is different, I said. How so? The founder swiveled his chair to look directly at me. The faux Noguchi IKEA lamp flickered, and in that moment I lost all memory of what had happened or where I had gone. I recalled an odd sensation, almost as if I had blacked out, but nothing else. I'm not sure, I said. It's that damn memory issue, he said, returning to his screen. We need more engineers, he muttered, which made me, a non-technical person, feel worthless. Stunned, I opened the bug tracking system. The familiar motions of filing the bug began to put me at ease. I convinced myself that whatever happened was an issue I could document, log, and resolve. Black box image bug, I wrote, and attached Riley S.'s profile photo. I noticed that the photo wasn't entirely black. The bottom half contained wavy lines. I zoomed in to analyze the image, but was jolted out of my investigation by the ding of a new email. Warning, content review queue full. I printed out the photo and tucked it into my messenger bag to investigate later. Thank you.
I'm scared because I'm pretty loud with that one. Can you hear me? That was wonderful. Thank you. So one of the things that we were just chatting before we came in, and one of the things I wanted to ask you is how you would describe, we got a wonderful synopsis, but how you would describe sort of what your thought process for this book was. Because we were talking about how the New York Times has described it as a sharp thriller, which feels, to those of us who've read it, feels true. But I'm also wondering if that was your intention when you sat down to write.
You know, that's a great question. Thank you, Yohanca. And it's really cool to see like a publication like the New York Times call your book a sharp literary thriller. So you're like, oh yeah, I meant to do that. But really, like for me, this is, I guess, like what people like speculative or like literary sci-fi that's a workplace novel or a coming of age novel about an employee who works at a small dating app startup who discovers a glitch in the app that transports him to other worlds. So it's a book that's like about losing yourself to work and trying to search for your identity through work, especially in your 20s, like, you know, after college. And I think the book does raise questions about technology, about how we use technology to connect with each other and when that fails. Yeah, but I mean, I'll take sharp literary thriller. That's fine.
I mean, you did it all. I will sort of say the unspoken part and ask whether there is any overlap between your history in tech and the story that we've read.
Yeah, that's a great one. It's kind of funny because like the part I read to you is, you know, I preface it by saying like the founder like asked one of the 3 employees at his startup to write the mission statement for the startup. And that's like probably a sign that the startup might not be that successful or there's something else going on here. So like drawing from my real life, like I've had the opportunity to work at a few different companies, like and all of those were run by people who were very kind of like with it and determined. So that part is like the fictional kind of like like what did Ethan get himself into by working at this company called Date that like is like trying to set people up with their soulmates, but actually makes them go on several dates, you know, with lower percentile matches before they even get a chance to presumably do that. But for those of you who've read like the opening pages of this novel, like Ethan biking from his apartment in Bernal Heights to an office in Soma, like that was pretty much my exact bike route. Like a lot of these details of place of San Francisco in 2010 are exactly what it was like. Like some people here can attest to the fact that we had a lot of Nature Valley granola bars and like Red Bull and the Instagram office. Like all of these things were just like the texture of what it was like to work at a startup in that time. Like definitely true.
So one of the things that I loved most about this novel is how much of a novel of place it is. Like, I think people often use the phrase, it's a love letter to X. And this is one of those books that to me is like the epitome of that. Like, this is a love letter to San Francisco, and it's a love letter to a place like nothing I've ever read before. It is like, you can kind of feel it in between the lines that the person who wrote this book loves the city. I'm like emotional thinking about it, even as a transplant. Like I'm from New York, I got no idea what's going on. But like the attention to location is so beautiful and so thoughtful in this book. And so I have two questions about that for you. One is like sort of how you went about conceiving sort of how place was working in the narrative, and another one is like on a more technical level, like did you have like a murder map with like red threads to keep track of all the locations?
Oh, that's, well, first of all, thank you for saying that about the book. Like I really, I mean, I started writing this in Tucson, Arizona when I was in grad school, and I was really missing San Francisco. And I mean, I love Tucson, and like, if you talk to me after, like, I try to encourage everyone to move there. I think it's like a great place for artists. But I was really missing San Francisco, and like, I moved here after college, like, spent my whole 20s here, like, you know, most of my life was here. But I felt like, in a way, like I couldn't write about San Francisco without leaving. And in Tucson, I remember like sitting at our kitchen table, like just kind of like thinking about my 20s. I was 30 when I started writing it, like thinking about my 20s, thinking about San Francisco and feeling this longing for the city. And so I just started writing about it. And I actually, like, the first like few pages of the book are pretty much exactly as they were when I wrote them at the kitchen table in Tucson. A murder, what did you call it? A murder map?
Did I don't know if that's a thing. I feel like, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. I definitely, like, so then I was in Tucson, and then we moved moved around a lot, but after Tucson, came back to the Bay Area for like a year, and then moved up to Portland, and the pandemic started. So it was like lockdown era in Portland, and I was in the middle of, like, I think getting ready to submit the novel to sell it or something with revision, and I really wanted to come down to San Francisco, but it just like wasn't the time. And so I used Google Maps a lot, and like Street View with like 2010 San Francisco, and like I got really wrapped up in this, and like I at some point I was like so deep in edits, I was like, I think I'm gonna see myself in one of these photos. It's gonna be like this guy in a gray sweatshirt, like walking to the taqueria.
Google Maps is the unseen hero, the unsung hero of all writers. Yeah. So how did that work though? Because you were writing about an era. So how did you research what businesses no longer exist? Like how did that process work?
Yeah, I mean, this is mainly from my memory, and so I don't think like if you really fact check it, like certain things, I mean, and they're fictional. There's like an art tech collective in Oakland in the novel, and like that doesn't exist to my knowledge. But there were some things, like there's like the Keith Haring sculpture that's in front of the Moscone Center now, like the men dancing. It's like a blue and red and a yellow sculpture, and that's actually like moved a couple times since, like, I used to walk by it in 2010. So it like moved to the DeYoung for a little bit while there was construction, and then it moved back, but like a half a block from the original spot. I don't know.
And you were just tracking it in your
I was sort
map?
of tracking that. Yeah, I was. It was kind of like, well, they're going to, and I think that was very intentional for me. It was like, they're going to stop here on this corner at this sculpture because it was there in 2010 and now it's not. So things like that, I think I wanted to kind of capture that part of that era of San Francisco.
Yeah. And so speaking of eras, I feel like I really loved what you said about having to sort of, because I experienced this in my own writing too. Sometimes you have to leave something in order to be able to write about it. And so do you feel like having some distance from being, I think Ethan is 24, made it easier to write about being 24?
Definitely, yeah. I think in terms of like that mindset, like the character is very, well, it's set in 2010, and I think there was like a real, like, it's like kind of an era of techno optimism, you know, and like there's surveys now where you see it's like, oh, like sometime in 2015, 2016, like it seems like the general public had this less like optimistic view of tech. I don't know. But in order to inhabit that mindset, I think I needed to kind of like step out of this city and especially like the industry, the tech industry, to write about it.
It was more optimistic then than it is now?
I mean, that's what certain surveys say. You know,
What do we
I
think?
can't
Do we
cite
feel,
them.
do we feel good about tech?
I feel like, I mean, I don't feel like it's like a good or bad thing. I feel like it's more of like public knowledge about how things
Yeah.
work, you know? Like I think just as consumers or users, we have like a much better idea of how companies operate and how they monetize our use of their products. And there's an exchange there, you know, like we get to use apps that connect us with other people, and, you know, they get to use data on us. Like,
Yeah, and I think that's something your book tackles really thoughtfully, which is this conversation about how innovation and art compare to each other. Like, what does it mean to treat art and tech as conflicting, opposing things, when in reality a lot of the same people are, you know, like I mean, I think you have like wonderful passages. I was like reading them to Josh earlier today, but
it's really nice of you.
But I really admired the way your book took that conversation on, and I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about that, about how you think about art versus tech.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why that's in the novel is because my experience working in tech was like an experience of working with some of the most creative people I've met in my life. And it was really cool to be a part of some of these companies where it's like we get to build something together, and it's like this process of making. And I really feel like for me that connects to making art. Like for me, it's all like writers say this all the time, but it's like really about the process of making the art that I love. And I really connected. I think that's why I was drawn to tech in the first place, really, is like there were these other people who wanted to kind of like make something from scratch. And as someone who kind of, you know, wanted to make a book from scratch or stories from scratch, like I related to that.
Yeah, I think there's a passage about imagining futures and how tech is really about imagining other ways of living, right? Like other potential. And so I wonder, I mean, insofar as your book is concerned, I'm like trying to like sort of tiptoe around anything that would be considered a spoiler. It's tough because you want to get right into, right? But one of the things I wondered about was, so the tech. So let's, even the passage you read, how much of that tech would we say is real? I feel like
I love that you're asking me this like I'm the authority. It's like I don't really know. Like I think there are a lot of like the phone down if you're shy thing I read in like I can't remember who the person was. Like someone came to the University of Arizona and gave this talk about that. And it wasn't connected to business or industry in any way. It was like a psychologist who was like had a group of people looking at their phone use and behavior. So there were a lot of things like that where I was just kind of like maybe like opportunistically kind of like grabbing at them, the way that like maybe if I were inventing my own app, like I can't program, like I can't code. And so I was like, well, why don't I just make a dating app in my fiction? And that's probably a way I would go about it, you know? And I think I like reflecting on this, I'm like, oh, my startup probably would have failed miserably, but it would have been a lot of fun. And yeah.
You're crafting the perfect experience of love. You're going to teleport us. But yeah, like I guess when I was reading this, I was like, this is skirting so close to on the edge of what I already know about tech and the sort of horror stories that we all read about, like the accelerometer tracking how fast you move your phone, and sort of this idea of the self as like an endless font of data. And so I wondered how much of that was like steeped in fact, but it almost doesn't matter because philosophically, I think your book is asking this question of like, what does it mean to have a quantified self? Like, can you know someone?
Yeah, like
right?
if you're someone building an app called Date and you had all of that information, like, so what? You know, what do you do with it? Like, how do you quantify a person or try to like categorize them in a way that can connect them to their soulmate or their top match? And that was kind of like, you know, a reason I wanted to introduce a dating app into the book, is because even working in technology, like my role was like a community manager. Like it was kind of to think about how technology could bring people together. And so if I can invent an app, and any app in this book, like a dating app seems like a really straightforward, like direct way of doing that, thinking how to bring two people together. But obviously, like it has its pitfalls. It's like hard to capture the texture of a human relationship in an app.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big conflicts of the book, right? Like the difference between a digital algorithm person, the self that you are online, and the self that you are in real life, and then this art versus tech is another one. And I mean, I feel like there's so much beautiful attention to what art is in the book as well. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how there's like a strong conversation with art, specifically in San Francisco. Again, returning to this idea of the love letter to the city that I found really compelling. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you injected art into this and how it sort of worked thematically for you in terms of the plot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the most straightforward way of answering that question is that the protagonist Ethan is an art history major, and so that's something he just studied at school.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably more for him like about identity. It's like, this is like who I was in college and what I cling to. And so now that I'm doing this new thing in tech, like, can I hold on to that in some way? And I think as the book goes on, like it kind of infuses it. You kind of see how his perspective on art may inform his thoughts about technology. And I think that's where it gets complicated because, you know, he's working for a startup that's a business and has to make money. And I think his like more romantic view of art is that, you know, it's there and we can enjoy it and make it.
I mean, it's a beautiful sort of dovetailing of these two things. So sort of panning back out, I'm wondering, as a reader and as a writer, I always want to know about the general timeline of how the book came together. So from the moment that you had the first idea and you thought this could be a novel to when you were looking at the last print proofs, like how long was that?
It's a really long process to write a book. Like, I feel like I was even like going for it, like write this thing. And I, you know, like coming from the tech industry, like I just had it in my head. I was like, you can pretty much do anything in 6 weeks and then release it and like iterate or whatever. And this actually like really like whenever I went down to Tucson, and this is also just like the way time worked in my head, like going down to Tucson, I met up with like a fellow graduate student in a cafe, and I was like, we were talking for a while. I was like, this is a great conversation, but like we got to end it, because in my head I had this like 30-minute timer that I was used to from just like having 30-minute meetings, and she just kept going. And I was like, oh, so this is like, I feel like I entered into a new experience of time in that conversation. And then lucky for me that like served me for writing a book, because it took a long time. I started writing it in grad school, somewhere in like in the middle of grad school. I think it was a 2-year program, and I think I really started writing it in 2017. I had a draft maybe a year later, and like pretty much like the plot was pretty much the same. It was kind of like this process of like digging back into the novel and trying to figure out like, who is this character, like what are they doing, like what, you know, refining the technology, stuff like that. So then in late 2019, I was like talking to agents to sell the book, and then I was kind of like, you know, I really like working on this. I don't know if I want to sell it yet. And so I said, okay, I'll pick up these conversations later. And I went to an art residency in early 2020. And this is actually late February 2020. And at the residency, I was like, I'm going to read this book one more time. And then like the NBA stopped their games, you know, like pandemic happened. And everyone there was just kind of like, all these artists, writers who'd already published books were like, you just gotta like move ahead with this, like send the manuscript out. And so on the plane ride home, when like lockdown was happening, I emailed an agent I was talking to, like, let's sign that contract and do or die. And not making light of it. And I signed with the agent, and we did some revisions and then sent it out, and it actually sold really fast. It sold like once we put it out on submission, it wasn't a big deal. Then it sold, and I worked with the editor, and it sold in late 2020. And I worked with the editor for about a year, and I haven't touched this book in a year. Like, I have read it, I can't tell you how many times. And it was really a great process to work on it, but the waiting period of, waiting for the book to come out, like, it feels surreal to sit here, say, like, this is the physical object. It is
wild.
Here.
So
6 years.
Yeah, actually, can we?
Thank you.
And 6 years is our time.
And
Time.
that's definitely not uncommon, like that's.
Yeah. But it counts every time.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, now I'm like looking back. If you can remember, were there any characters or sort of plot elements that surprised you as you were writing? Like, was there anything where you like didn't think it was going to be a big part of the book, and it sort of asserted itself and made itself bigger in your mind as you were writing?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer to that. Like, the way, like, I feel like a lot of people who write fiction think this way. It's like, I just wrote, and the things that happened. And so, like, it was a dating app. And I was kind of like following this character on his bike ride in the beginning of the book. It's like, okay, now he's in this office. It's a dating app. It's not like a conscious decision. Like, okay, he's really kind of like going through these monotonous tasks. What happens? Oh, there's a portal or something. So those things kind of all just happened organically. And I think, if anything, like in revisions of the book, it was just like a lot of thinking about like structure and pace. Mm-hmm. That was probably like the most surprising thing, is just like that I didn't realize going into this, is like just how much like you're thinking about like plot elements, like making sure like this thing that happens on page 67 corresponds with this thing that happens on page 189.
Yeah.
Am I overwhelming?
Yeah. Having never written a novel, hats off to you for having pulled that off to the point where it gets lauded as a literary thriller, right?
Thriller. Mm-hmm.
Sharp, too. I think sort of as a counterbalance to that, there's also this book is also, I think, really interested in love and what a human emotion that is like unbreakdownable, like love, like what does that mean? And it plays a pretty strong role, I'd say, especially as the book builds. And I wonder how, like, if you like writing sci-fi and then having this like strong emotional element too. I wonder how you like juxtapose those two things, and whether that was a conscious choice or whether it just felt natural. Like, how did that work for you as you were writing?
Yeah, I think like I think this is why plot was probably more of a thing like after I finished the manuscript, is because I think a lot of the like human emotions part like comes to me when I'm writing. Like I want to write about that. And I tend to have this like part of me as a writer too that wants to like keep the reader turning the pages. But yeah, a lot of the like love human connection part, like, I mean, it is hard to talk about this without like giving away spoilers, but like one of the main kind of like relationships that Ethan has, he's recently broken up, or his girlfriend broke up with him, and he kind of becomes really good friends with this person he works with at a date named Noma. And they're kind of like trying to solve this mystery together of like where, like, what are these black box photos that seem to show us another world, and how do we get there? And they're so invested in that kind of work, the work of solving the mystery, but like along the way they're having these more intimate moments, I think, like not that I would call it like romantic love, but just this strong friendship. And so that I think that juxtaposition of like the focus on work and like all these things happening in an app and then meeting up with a person, and Noma actually lives like down a block away, like across from the
This
ritual.
is what I mean. Like it's like the locations in the book all have, I would say, addresses that you can plot on your map. Maybe sometime there will be tours.
Maybe.
Of the please report your bug here. I mean, I would go on one. And I think that's, I mean, I really admire how particular you were with locations in the city. So again, maybe we should talk about the title. Because I'm realizing now we're talking about the black boxes. And so please report your bug here.
Please report your bug here. I was just convinced that they were going to make me change the title because it's too long. But they didn't. And they being the publishing industry, I thought that like it needed to be a noun, like one word. That's like tweetable, It's a little bit of a mouthful. I read somewhere that Hemingway said that like the best title is 5 syllables, and mine's I think 6. But that's Hemingway. But that was basically just like an homage to working in the tech industry, like at several startups, like a couple of different startups that I worked at. Like my job was to like help figure out what was breaking. And so if people were tweeting about the app or whatever, like you'd say like, okay, like thanks for reporting this. Please report your bug here with like a bit.ly link to a form that I made. And then I'd like see a spreadsheet of, hundreds of people describing a bug, and then someone else would have to fix it.
I mean, another part of this that we can probably say without spoiling anything is that the protagonist works in like content moderation. So he's like cleaning up these like sort of bad photos that are
violate
uploaded.
The terms of use.
That violate the terms of use, which I feel like psychologically has to be the hardest work that I could ever imagine. Like just in terms of what you see every day. But what's fascinating to me about the Please Report Your Bug Here title is that in the book, in order to sort of establish what the bug is, the narrator has to make it happen again. So you have to sort of create the incident more than once.
Yeah, and this is a thing that I think a lot of people who've worked on apps know. It's like, oh, this weird thing happened, and you can't really do anything with that weird thing unless you can replicate it. And so, like, if a user says that, you have to say, like, okay, can you, like, send me the steps that you use to, like, encounter this bug? And Ethan's kind of like, well, I went to another world. Like, how do I replicate that? And, like, do I want to? But he does try. Like, he's a very, like, dedicated employee. And he tries to replicate that. But it's a lot, I think for him, it's a lot more than just, like, what are the steps on the app? He just gets kind of neurotic about it.
I just realized that it's time to open up the floor for questions. If anybody has any, I have plenty, so I can keep going. But
yeah, raise your hand. You got one.
Strategically, I should have left you.
Phones up. Don't be bashful.
Should we switch?
All right. Well, full disclosure, I haven't read the book yet, but I know the premise. But since you've written about a dating app or created a fictional one, I'm curious to know, is this a critique of modern dating apps, or what do you think is the sort of state of modern dating apps? And dating.
I can just yell. Thank you for that question. I approached it. So I've been in a long-term relationship since like most of these people have known me. My wife, Erin. And I haven't used dating apps. I know that's not, and I think the modern state of dating, like, I think I've witnessed this through like being in this like long-term stable relationship. Like, my brother's not here, so I'm gonna just like out him. But I remember he would be okay with this. But I remember a while back, like before dating apps really existed, being in the car with my brother and was like, oh, so like, where did you meet your new girlfriend? And he just like had this way of putting it. He's like, Match.com. And it was like, but you know, I was living in San Francisco and like had kind of heard more about people like meeting online and didn't really think that was too strange. But he wasn't living here, and I think was a little self-conscious about it. And my history with this goes back to like when I was a teenager in Missouri, like meeting people on AOL. You know, like it's too. You know, we don't need to get into that.
I forgot I had it on my to-do list to get into that.
So I kind of like, I saw that happen in like this evolution of dating apps. Like a lot of my friends who are in relationships and like meeting people through dating apps. And I think it's like, I think it's fascinating more from my perspective as someone who's worked in tech, who's interested in how people come together through technology. I don't have firsthand experience of actually using the apps to meet people. It sounds like dating is really hard. That's, yeah. And I hope, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I would trust, even if there were the perfect dating app, like if I would trust that. I think that some of these apps do a great job of like putting people together, like putting people in the same room, and then you kind of take it from there. Is my understanding. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Now that you've you know it takes 6 years for the next book you write, have you thought about how you might change your process for what you spend 6 years with?
Definitely like AI is writing the whole next one, so that's a great question. I mean, part of this really, like the 6 years, is like learning a new industry, which I'm very fascinated with. Like I love learning about the tech industry, and like I'm so giddy about learning about publishing. Like if you look on the map of Manhattan, like all the publishers are like walking distance, and all the agents are next to them, and they can just walk the manuscript to each other, and they all use rotary phone. Like they don't really, but like it feels very, very like old school. And a lot of the process for publishing for me in publishing my first book was like getting the agent, understanding how the submission process works, like research, like with my agent, like researching editors. So I think a lot of that for the next book is streamlined. The subject selection is interesting. It's like, I think Aaron can probably attest to this, but I constantly am like, that's my next book. I'm going to write about blah, blah, blah. So I have like several ideas, and that kind of doesn't matter in a way. Like it's just, I have to start writing and find a voice for the character, and then the book takes shape. Like I wish I were someone who could like I actually tried doing this, like outlining a novel. I outlined the whole thing. I was like, this novel is going to write itself, and I just lost interest in it. And I think that's like the process of writing for me. Like again, it's like kind of cliche for writers to say, but like the process of writing is just like so fun, like exhilarating for me, that I don't really want to like over optimize that. But you know, hopefully I would ideally like to publish another novel before 6 years is up.
Okay, so when you work in tech, you're always cutting scope. You know, you got to cut scope to get it out on the deadline. I'm curious if there's anything like that you cut from the book in the editing process that you're like, but that was like a fun little tidbit, or some plot line that you had to cut or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. there are, I have a whole folder on my desktop that's like cut, I call them scraps. And luckily, like the book is organized in these like short chapters with chapter headings, and that was always the case. I was writing it like that, so I just had like a lot of short chapters sort of arranged chronologically. And in the editing process, I was able to say like, oh, I think these two chapters are kind of doing the same thing, so maybe I'll cut this one. Or maybe there's like something about what's happening here that can go into this chapter. There was one scene that I really wanted to keep that was just like, it really added nothing to the book, but it was just like a Dolores Park scene. It was like, I remember like going to Dolores Park with my friends and like drinking whiskey lemonade, and I just like, there were some things for me that were like sentimental. It would have been nice, but mostly a lot of those were just kind of like hanging out in San Francisco scene. So maybe there's like a B-side at some point. San Franciscans to read, but
B-side coming soon. Another question? Yes.
I feel I'm not accustomed to hearing writers talk about it being a fun and exhilarating process. And I wonder what other experiences were part of the emotional landscape for you.
really cutting through the public persona here. Fun and exhilarating when I'm just totally writing. The emotional landscape of writing and publishing a book, it's just a lot to hold in your head. Like it's a lot to hold in your head. So psychologically, like you have this story, you're like, okay, like, but I know I need to tweak this thing, and it just messes up the whole story, and you realize that like this thing that you thought was going to take 15 minutes takes a couple weeks, or something like that. So it's a lot of just like, there's definitely like this feeling of, at times, like feeling overwhelmed with the project, and almost like the project kind of taking over you, like you're not in control, which I think if you can submit to is great, but it's not always so easy to submit to that. Yeah, I think that's, and I think for me, like the process of waiting for the book to come out, like I think when I finish something, I'm kind of like, okay, let's show it to someone. And this is part of my experience of just learning about publishing a book, because there's like so much that the publishing team's doing behind the scenes. Like there's a sales team, like trying to make sure the books are in bookstores and available on Target.com. Like it's like important work, and they need time to do that. But as the creator of the work, you're kind of like, okay, let's get this thing out there. Yeah, there's a lot more I can say about that. That's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would love to know who your favorite writers are, living or dead.
Have you read Yohanca's stories? There's a Best American 2023 short stories. It's like the book that like everyone who writes short stories wants to be in, and Yohanca's work is in there. And I'm a huge fan of Yohanca's. So there are kind of like two authors who, like, for this book specifically, kind of after I left the tech industry, I read this book by Helen Phillips called The Beautiful Bureaucrat, which is like a short novel, workplace novel. It's like very surreal, and I feel like it really is like the precursor to the TV show Severance. In that book, I thought just like captured this like emotional truth of what it's like to work in, like to go work for a company. So she's up there as one of my favorite writers, and her latest book, The Need, I think was Call It Thriller, and it is very good. And then I just really love Charles Yu. I read Charles Yu's short story Standard Loneliness Package, and like when I in 2016 maybe, and just like fell in love with that story, and then read he has 2 story collections, and then his 3rd book was his debut novel called How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, and I just thought that was such a good book. And he wrote Interior Chinatown, which won the National Book Award a couple years ago. So right now, like, my favorite contemporary writers probably Helen Phillips and Charles Yu. I mean, there's so many.
Okay, we got time for.
Do I read any nonfiction?
If so, what non-fictional book-like things do you do?
I actually read a lot of nonfiction. I've read a lot of nonfiction in the last year. I think just working so deep on a novel, I wanted to read something else. But also the nonfiction program at grad school is very prominent. Like, a lot of people go there for nonfiction. So I read Andrew Munson, who's a professor of mine, and he wrote this book called Vanishing Point that I think he does a really interesting job of kind of writing memoir that feels like it is nonfiction, but it's on this borderline of, is it made up? I read Ada Calhoun's Also a Poet, the memoir. Ada Calhoun's a writer and many other things, but she's also the daughter of the New Yorker art critic, Peter, whose name I never know how to pronounce, Peter Sheldell, who died recently. And her memoir is about finding these old cassette tapes that her dad had to interview Frank O'Hara. And her dad, he's very accomplished art critic, but could never write this biography of Frank O'Hara. So she finds the tapes and kind of talks to him about that. But the book ends up being about art in this era of New York, but also in poetry, but also her relationship with her father. I really enjoyed that book. What was that called? It's called Also a Poet by Ada Calhoun.
Time for another question, if anyone has one. Yes.
It's more something that I kind of want to hear you talk more about, because you mentioned Beautiful Bureaucrat, and you talk about it as a workplace novel, and I feel like we've kind of focused a lot on I don't know, the tech aspect, the thriller aspect. But for me, one thing I found, I don't know, that really stuck with me about both your book and a lot of the kind of writing you've done around it, is just the way it captured what it meant to work specifically around when we graduated 2008, 2009. And I don't know, something felt very important about capturing the workplace, and specifically capturing it for our generation. And so I'm wondering how you thought about that and kind of what you see the value of those settings as.
I thought it was going to be who would be in the movie.
You can answer that too if you want, though.
Very thoughtful question. Well, I mean, I think there, I don't know exactly, but I feel there was for me at least, this feeling of graduating from college, and I wrote a novella I was an English major at a liberal arts college, I was doing that, but I also had a lot of student loan debt and I needed a job, and I worked at Facebook right after college in 2007 when it was just kind of just expanded to high school students. It was college and high school students, and I was really looking for something, I think, in that job that could help shape who I was. So that could make me I was trying to figure out how do I be an adult in this world, and support myself. And so I was thinking a lot about that when I was writing this novel. Ethan graduates from college, he's an art history major, but he's searching for identity through work, and it really overwhelms his life. And like, I think there's something about that, like you know, personally for me, like I find that like kind of exhilarating, but I do find it like kind of fun to figure out, like, okay, like if I can totally immerse myself in this, but it definitely has drawbacks, you know. And I think I can't really like speak for our generation, you know, but I think like there was something for me like in the air then where it felt like I'm here at Facebook in 2007, like we're gonna change the world, like everyone around me thinks that too. I think we're doing it. And I mean, in some ways it definitely did, but for me personally, like it really, you know, it was a work experience, and I met great people there, and I have that, like, that shaped me. But I think it's like, it's dangerous when you like put too much into your work to try to count on your work to kind of like become your personality.
Amen.
But you know,
You gotta work, but you could also write books, and congratulations on Please Report Your Book here. Yeah, y'all, let's hear it for Josh Riedel. And thank you, Yohanca Delgado. Thank you so much for being here and leading the conversation.